right, we are back with another episode of Punk Rock Politics. I'm Mitch Maley, joined by Brendan Ragan. We do not have Elsie here today.
We miss her.
We do.
Yeah.
And but we do have Alex Boyce, local comedian and idiot savant on all things economic and finance. So I asked him to come in and help weigh in on a couple of those subjects. And although we're missing our female, I have a feeling that with you two soy boys, I have estrogen level covered.
I'm very sensitive, so I'll try to maintain the feminine energy.
I am wearing skinny jeans right now.
You are. Well,
Yeah.
You always wear skinny jeans.
That's
buddy.
true.
Come on. All right, let's get right into it. We've got a big week. The Senate passed a COVID relief bill, started the process of going through reconciliation with it. So let's lay out real quick the idea of budget reconciliation, because I've got a lot of questions about this. It's a fairly simple process. What you have is the filibuster is a Senate rule, and what it basically says, so it's not a law, and it could be eliminated at any point by the party in power, but it's a rule that doesn't say you need 60 votes to pass something. It says you need 60 votes to end debate before you vote on a bill. And that's why you see these, the threat of a filibuster. And then sometimes when it's actually enacted and they're reading, Dr. Seuss and stuff in front of the, Senate chambers and sleeping there and everything, that's a way to stall the debate process. So without those 60 votes to end it, you have to keep debating. So somebody has to say something into a microphone and the Senate has to stay open. But until you have those 60 votes, then you can filibuster a bill. Budget reconciliation is a way around that because the budgetary process is exempt from the filibuster and it doesn't require presidential signature, so it can't be vetoed. So you're able to, with a simple majority, get something through in budget reconciliation. However, it has to pass muster with the Office of Budget Management and with the Senate committee of being related to the budget. So you basically start with a resolution that says you're going to add or detract from the budget by this amount with this legislation, and then you move forward. So that's the process that was started, but now it will be open to debate. So that's really where the sausage is going to be made. So they're already talking about the $1.9 trillion, but they've been very open to negotiation. Simultaneously, 10 senators on the Republican side, the exact number they would need to pass an actual bill, released their own $600 million, much lower, much stripped down version of that bill. So that kind of shows the gulf in between there. So let's talk about the stimulus part first, because here's something that I think the Biden administration is opening themselves up for a tremendous amount of criticism. They promised during those Senate races, elect these two senators and you will get a $2,000 check.
Go out.
$2,000, and they'll go out immediately as soon as possible. Okay. Once those senators were elected, then we immediately had it reimagined as, well, what we meant was 1,400 to bring the last
you already
total.
got 600 a few weeks ago. And that is going to be $2,000 altogether. And by the way, that 600, it's not like they didn't know about the 600 when they were saying, hey, we'll give you $2,000. Yes. So yes, they're running into a bit of a that
looked like a bait and switch, right?
A little, yeah.
And now, and it's one thing to say if we sent the 1,400 out in January, that hey, that was right on the heels of your. But now that 600's old. That 600's gone. It's spent
long
in the economy.
Gone.
So
Jeff
now
Bezos has everyone $600 already,
and we're going to get to him too today. But now you look at it and you say we've got 1,400. We're probably looking at March or April before that money would actually go out at this point. When you look at how much debate, because by the way, we're going to have a Senate impeachment trial starting next week. Yeah. So that's going to delay the vote on this. So my question to both of you is this a really big mistake by the Biden administration? Because they were offered a straight up and down vote on just the stimulus, where they could have definitely got to 1,400. It might have been able to get to 2,000 if they would have went a straight up down vote, and they chose not to do that. Will they be punished for that? I'll start with you, Brendan.
I think that you got to do this through reconciliation. And, Chuck Schumer came out and said, we will not make the mistake of doing too little. So, all right, give us $2,000 then. So let's start there. But I think that they have to move forward in some way. Biden did a really great job of pulling these 10 senators aside and saying, all right, we're going to listen. We're going to hear each other out. Your proposal is about a third of what we want to do. And they left that meeting and pretty much everyone said, well, we clearly didn't create consensus, but it was good to hear each other. And I think Biden probably left that meeting thinking, well, we have to move this through with 51 votes rather than 60, because 60 is such a long way off that they have to do something now. Now, is it going to bite them in the ass? I don't know. The Senate has so much to do right now. The Biden administration, I know we're going to talk about immigration too. That they've got their hands full with that, with COVID relief, with confirming the rest of his cabinet. Oh, by the way, there's going to be potentially a long impeachment trial. So the Senate is busy. I think you got to take what you can do right now and not say, all right, let's drag this out and maybe we'll get $2,000 later. Maybe we'll pass this with some broad bipartisan support that will never truly exist, even with these 10 sort of quote unquote moderate senators. So I think you got to act. I think they have to go right now. And I'm glad that they're bringing it to the floor to debate about it immediately.
What do you think, Alex? Separate it or push it through reconciliation?
Well, I think just to give a little context to this conversation overall, this country is the only place in the major developed world where we're having this issue over stimulus checks. If you look at places like Canada, Great Britain, Japan, places like Ireland, they're giving, in Japan, 100% of government support to fill in the paychecks for people in the private sector. In Canada, it's 90%. Every month, they're sending out checks. And these are also countries that have some sort of either nationalized healthcare system like in Britain or some sort of single-payer system like in Canada. And it seems to be only here where we're having this discussion over what are ludicrously referred to as stimulus checks when they're relief checks for people who are suffering economically very, very much. So, I mean, in my view, because of the sort of dire straits that people are in, I would say push it through. But, there is a lot going on, but I feel like the suffering that people are feeling economically right now it cannot be overlooked.
What we have heard, though, and the Republicans are kind of making the relief bill argument because without really trying to, and that they're saying, well, there's a lot of people who'd be getting these checks that aren't out of work. And, you just be giving money to people that now we're talking a target of under $75,000 in income. So we're not talking about rich people.
There's already a phase out in place. It's not like every living person in the United States is going to get $1,400. They have a system in place that for every dollar that you make over $75,000, right, you'll start to phase out and get less and less from that stimulus down to zero if you make so much. So we're not giving millionaires just extra bucks.
But what's important about the stimulus part is that that's what's so important. That's kind of what worked this summer a little bit, was that the poorest people that you give money to spend the most of it.
Yes, and the quickest.
Yes.
As well.
And more likely in their own economy.
Yeah, exactly. That's very true. And that argument of like, well, we don't want to give rich people free money, that's the same argument that's been made against universal free college. I remember Pete Buttigieg made that argument against universal free college on the campaign trail that, we don't want to just give free money to already rich people. But I don't think that's a really relevant thing in this issue, especially if you target people who are lower income, who have lost a majority of their wealth in the last 12 years since the financial crash. So, I think it needs to be, in my view, we need to get monthly checks out to people, and we should have been doing it 10 months ago. But
by the way, not a single Republican said, hey, we shouldn't give more money to millionaires.
Right.
Mm-hmm. In 2017, when they passed, similarly, a $1.9 trillion tax cut for rich people. Then the argument was, give rich people more of their money back because that's good for the economy. But suddenly now in this fashion, if we cut them, we cut somebody wealthy a $1,400 check, that's going to be bad for the financial economy.
Yeah,
that's the argument now.
Good
which
point.
is demonstrably not, because when you look at, when you give the money, first of all, when you give the money, let's look at the PPP money that went out in the original stimulus bill and look at how many very profitable, up to hedge funds, were taking money from that. And then we were saying, well, it's not that big of a deal. If it's under $2 million, we're not even going to investigate what you took. So everybody was taking it affected me by 1.9 million, it affected me by 1.8, and just plugging this into the bottom line. And we're saying, oh, well, at the end of the day, it's still creating jobs and stuff. But the reality is that's the least likely money that in terms of drilling down into the economy, right? Because what are they doing with that money, Alex?
Speculating. I mean, they're taking that money and they're moving it to any place where they can find a return for it. There's been a huge push since the CARES Act in March into emerging market securities, into basically poor developing countries, in air quotes, to find returns on this money. So it's not circulating back into the economy in the form of higher wages or higher salaries for people or increased benefits. A lot of people who make wages don't even have benefits attached to their jobs. That money that's flowing into the financial sector is looking for a return, ultimately.
And because there's no interest rates, there's no place to go and safely put money and get any kind of return, it's getting more and more and more speculative, which puts a tremendous amount of risk onto the market collapse.
And
right?
we're seeing that specifically, not to get too off topic, but in the advent in the last 9 months of the SPACs, the special purpose acquisition companies that have been, last year alone, they raised about $800 billion for these vehicles. In the first 3 months, the first 3 weeks of this year, they've raised the exact same amount of money for these speculative vehicles, but they're basically big funds of money with no specified purpose that purchase companies and take them public, surpassing the traditional IPO route. And that's become a major speculative frenzy on Wall Street in the past 9 months or so. So you're seeing a lot of money pooling up in these very speculative and frankly risky places. A good example of an SPAC company that's been taken public through that route is DraftKings. A lot of people will know about them. Mm-hmm. They were a company that was taken public through that route, which ultimately avoids SEC regulations. So it's very nice for the financiers in that way. They get larger returns.
And, I've said this several times on the podcast, and it's really, it's the one thing I'd like the American people to understand better, because when the deficit hawks come out now, and to go back to your point, Brendan, on the 1.9 trillion that was in the tax cuts passed under the Trump administration, really Paul Ryan's tax cuts that were ready-made to ship out the door when Trump came in, is that went through the reconciliation process. So that's how it did it, was they said, we're going to start with a resolution that we can add no more than 1.9 trillion over the next decade to the deficit. And that was okay. But the problem with that is, so one thing I'd like to say is that when you hear the argument that, oh, listen, man, we can't afford to be just borrowing money from China to give it to American people to spend. First of all, that's not the way that fiat currency works. I've stressed this several times. We do not borrow money from China. We don't borrow money from any other country. We're a sovereign currency issuer. The United States government issues or authorizes the Federal Reserve to issue currency, and there is conversely, there is an auction for security instruments at the same time, which anyone can buy who has US dollars, which is then paid in those same dollars that we print up. So it's not a function that we're borrowing money from China. But the other part of it is people will talk about the risk of inflation, and they'll say, well, if you put, and that is truly what you have to worry about in money creation and growing the economy, is you don't want the amount of money in the economy to outstrip your productive capacity, so that you don't have too much money chasing too few goods, and then the price of everything goes up. And that's when you talk about the $5 and $10 loaves of bread and so forth, and money becomes worth less and less. We haven't, even with all of these deficits, the important thing here is we haven't even hit our inflation targets for years. So we're not getting as much inflation as economists would like to see in the growth of the economy. However, where we're seeing inflation, Alex, is where?
The stock market. We're seeing major inflation in the
right?
stock market and in housing prices, especially at the upper echelon where you're talking, $20, $40, $50 million
luxury goods.
Properties.
So what does that demonstrate? Oh, wait a minute. The very richest people in the United States, in an economic perspective, so not talking moral, not talking punishing hard work, whatever you want to say on it, but in a purely economic sense, the very wealthiest, smallest class of people have too much money in that sense. So they're having to chase places to put that money that are more and more speculative, or they're putting it into assets that's inflating the very highest part. And that's why you have houses in the United States now going for in the hundreds of millions of dollars, because they're bidding amongst themselves in these limited luxury assets. So the greatest inflation we're seeing is on the very highest end products because of that class growing wealthier and wealthier exponentially compared to the consumer class.
And you look at, I'm sorry, Brendan.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. I'm the idiot in this conversation. I'm just trying to chime in and crack some jokes, but you guys are killing it right now. So please go ahead, Alex.
If you look at standard measures of the S&P 500 since the CARES Act last March, when they injected this, they created this $4.25 trillion special purpose vehicle between the Fed and the Treasury. They created this special credit vehicle called an SPV to inject $4.25 trillion into the finance markets. If you look at the S&P since then, it has rode this incredible wave up and up and up. And as people have probably noticed that, we've been hearing these headlines of new record highs in the stock market. The S&P is hitting new highs. The Russell 2000 is hitting new highs almost weekly. And that is because there is all of this money that's been injected through the Fed, as well as through, like I think you were mentioning earlier, quantitative easing, the securities purchasing and bond purchasing practices of the Fed. And that has created this enormous boost in inflation.
Well, that's important what you said about quantitative easing, because that's been going on for like 12 years now.
Yeah,
and
pioneered
so you
in Japan.
already had that amount of asset inflation because of the quantitative easing, and then you go and inject trillions of dollars on top of it. All of this money that's in these very few hands are trying to find places to go with it. You don't go park it in a bank account. You're trying to get a return on it, but increasingly, because again, we don't have interest rates, so you can't go like, look, if you go back to 2005, you could have got 5% on a 5-year CD with
baby,
which is great. Now you get, I think, like 1.1% maybe on 5 years, maybe. You know what I mean?
It's something very paltry. Yeah, and that's how you get, Tesla at 800. This car maker that sells like 15,000 cars a year, and their stock just jumped from 600 up to 850. Some crazy thing like that. It's like there's a divorce between the underlying fundamentals and price discovery on the stock market. There really
isn't price discovery. Is that fair to say?
I think, in my stupid opinion, yes. My very unprofessional opinion, yes. I think price discovery has been destroyed by all of this money that's been flooding into the market, chasing after minimal returns.
So by price discovery, we're saying that the correction that you would expect to happen, where people say,
fair market value.
Wait a minute, this is overpriced and it'll start trading lower. There's just more money injected, so that never actually comes to pass.
Yeah,
in a simple way.
And maybe I'm a moron, but this all comes back for me to the fight for 15. Because I read this, maybe you could correct me if I don't have this fact right. I'm pretty sure I do. That since 1960, if the minimum wage had grown with the rate of productivity, our minimum wage would be something like $23 or $24 an hour.
Mm-hmm. I was actually reading an article the other day by the economist Richard Wolff. And he was talking about an experiment that he ran. He graduated college in 1973, and he looked at the minimum wage in 1973, which was $4.03. And he ran an experiment that economists run, which is they'll say, okay, let's get a bundle of goods that we could buy in 1973 for the minimum wage. What could we purchase for $4.03? And then you go up to now to 2020, and you see, okay, how much would that same bundle of goods cost in today's money? And his costs it was about $23.50.
Okay, so there you go. So there's like another way to look at potentially the minimum wage needing to be around $23 or $24 if we were going to be at the 1960 rate. So what does that mean? In my opinion, it means there are $15 or $16 an hour that are not going to workers, that are going up somewhere else. You want to talk about the wealth hoarding at the top? That's what's happening. The productivity is...
Let's talk about two different metrics there. So to frame this fairly, we can talk about adjusted for inflation or adjusted for productivity, which are two very different things.
Right.
So if we look and just say the minimum wage, if you adjust it just for inflation, so just on the cost of goods and the inflation of wages, it peaked in 1969, which would be the equivalent today of just under $11 an hour. Okay, so that's in terms of just inflation. So when you just look at it inflationary wise, right now it would be about 13 and change, almost 14. Okay. just in inflation. Now, at the same time, workers have become exponentially more productive. Now, a lot of this is through technology. So you take, for example, I always use my job, as a journalist.
And scale, to be honest.
Yes.
Yeah.
As a journalist in the digital age, even with early digital papers, I turned in a type printed piece of paper to someone who wrote HTML and they typed it in, and then it produced digitally on a website somewhere. And then after a little bit of time, this is just one simple example, after a little bit of time, then they came up with software that could naturally converted what I was typing the first time into HTML, right, through these what they call GUIs, graphic user overlay systems. And now all of a sudden you didn't need that guy typing code anymore. So that job was eliminated. I'm now more productive. I'm now producing the same column with one instead of two jobs. Now, I don't get paid any extra for that, right?
Nope.
And that happens all throughout the economy. So my productivity and what's delivered through my labor goes up with a one-time investment in technology, eliminates the entire cost legacy of a whole person, all their benefits, all the payroll taxes, everything that goes in with it. So one of the main problems in the modern economy, in my opinion, is we don't have any way for workers to share in increased productivity. Not only do we not have a way, but it's actually inverse, because the opposite happens, because the population is forever growing. So your supply of labor is constantly expanding while your demand for it is, at the same time going down. So what happens then? You've got two market pressures moving in the opposite direction that now makes my labor worth less.
Yep.
That's very true. And let's not forget, I think a good way to define productivity is to look at productivity as the amount that you are giving to your employer through your work. And that a wage is the amount that your employer is giving to you for your work. So if you look at the productivity rate going up and the wage is staying fairly stagnant, that is, like you were saying, Brendan, that is a way to strip out money that's being earned by workers and keeping it at the top. It's one of those things that keeps the wealthy by divorcing the productivity rate from the wage rates, or divorcing the minimum wage rate from commodity prices, or adjusting it like we do with Social Security. Social Security is adjusted based on consumer price increases or decreases. And I think that would be great if we could do something like that for the minimum wage, to track it to productivity or track it to what real commodity prices are.
And even then, we finagle it a lot by saying, well, you're not going to eat steak, you're going to eat ground chuck.
Yeah.
We try to say that it hasn't gone up as much as it has.
You can eat dog food. You're fine. Don't stop complaining.
It's the same, yeah. And that brings up, so let's get into that $15 minimum wage. Great segue, because that's one of the things being debated that might come up. So what's going to happen now with the COVID bill is that, so this passed along party lines to start the process. They'll now go through, they'll have 50 hours of debate where people can offer amendments. This is known as vote-a-rama. This is their term for it, where literally you'll start there, and then everybody on both parties will be able to offer these different amendments, and that's when we'll see things go up or down. That's when we'll find out what that dollar amount in the stimulus bill comes. They're already talking about maybe walking it down to $1,000 instead of $1,400. But the other thing is, can the wage be tacked into there? We don't know that yet. There's some disagreement on whether that would pass muster as a budget reconciliation item. There has been another piece of legislation introduced in the House, but that would take it up to $15 by 2025, the same as the one that we passed in Florida by the referendum in this November's ballot. But that would actually be about $13 in purchasing power by 2025. So it really wouldn't be what it says it's going to be. But let's talk about the idea that, right back to that same part about the stimulus bill, why is it a good idea, Alex, to pay the people at the lowest wage spectrum more money?
Well, it's an interesting argument that comes up, and you'll hear this from business owners. They'll say, look, if I have to pay my employees more, we're going to lose jobs. And I always want to say, you've got to follow that argument through to its natural conclusion. If everybody, not just an individual business, but if everybody is required to pay a $15 minimum wage, it's true, you might have to lose a few workers. You might suffer in the immediate term economically, but what you're also going to have to do is meet the demand that's going to be created by having a consumer base that is now getting paid more. So a small business is also at the other side of this, also going to have to meet new demand that's going to be created from increasing the minimum wage across the board. So I always like to try to point that out to people who say, "Oh, it's going to kill jobs, it's going to do this." It's like, okay, that might be true, certainly in the short term. But what's also true is the demand increase on the other side of that when the consumer base in any given area has more money to spend.
Yeah. I'm in favor of raising the wage because, as we said earlier, the people with the least spend it the quickest and in their own communities. And if you spend in your community, the businesses in your community, the workers in your communities will have more money, and that's good for your local economy because they will continue to spend it. Allowing to keep to the top to keep peeling more and more off the top of the pile is going to, I mean, we're sitting around here talking about millionaires not knowing what to do with all their money, right, looking for places to bet this money, looking for GameStop to short, and we're talking about people making $7.25 an hour. And absolutely, in very few circumstances anywhere in the country, making enough money off of $7.25 an hour for 40 hours a week to even support a family of 2 or 1.
Yeah, it's impossible.
It's totally impossible.
They at minimum wage, you on average, I saw one study where on average minimum wage employees spend 110% of their income every year. Now you say, how do they do that? Well, they go into debt
Credit cards
every year.
Yeah.
So 110%. So that means you probably have to double their pay before they could even think about putting a penny of it into savings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know
this
what I
is
mean?
an old Bernie Sanders line, but there's a huge percentage of Americans who can't cover a $400 emergency.
Yes.
If we
big
can't,
chunk.
So it's not like these minimum wage or lower wage workers are just going to start stashing this away in the stock market or
The way that the higher wage people
Yes.
are.
Right. Exactly.
And that was the argument that Leon Cooperman made on CNBC the other day with this GameStop and AMC stock increase. He was saying, he's a big fund manager, and he was on CNBC saying, "Oh, this is just these people with their $600 government checks gambling it on the stock market," and that is the way they view it. But in terms of the minimum wage, it's like
like anyone held on to $600 for that long.
Yeah,
it was
like
gone.
that. Like, let's gamble this on the stock market. It's not like my kids need to eat this week sometime, but yeah, let's wait till GameStop goes up.
But nobody said, Cooperman didn't say, oh, and by the way, all that PPP that we got, we were just gambling on the stock market too.
Exactly.
It's okay.
It's
Good
fine
for me, not for
us.
thee. Right.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of like the minimum wage debate, let's also not forget that there are also swaths of people who the minimum wage is not enforced for, either federally or through states in some cases. And for farming and agriculture is one of those industries where they make the even sub minimum
By the
wage.
bushel, right?
Yeah.
The food service industry and prisons, where that's in my view it's an absolute outrage that as if prison wasn't punishing enough, but they're paying these people 22 cents a week to fight fires, to make clothing for Lowe's
uniforms
and McDonald's.
for companies like McDonald's.
Yeah, exactly. So there are huge swaths of the wage earning population who these ridiculous minimum wage laws aren't even enforced for at the low levels that they are. And I think for tipped workers, the federal minimum wage is like $4, something along those lines.
Big jump from $2.35 it was before that.
Big time. Yeah. You're in the money now. That's probably what drove GameStop stock up. Yeah, that increase, that big $2 increase.
Let me just say, when the minimum wage bill passed here in Florida in November, in the middle of a pandemic, when stuff is not good for theater industry, my business partner and I decided, all right, even for the interns or apprentices or anyone that we hire, $15 an hour will be the least that we pay anyone, any person across the board. If a nonprofit theater in the middle of a pandemic can do
that, right?
your business can do it. And if not, re-examine your business
Well,
model.
listen, that's another part where you look at the importance of regulation, because let's look on a larger scale. And let's say, for example, Target goes and says, for moral reasons, like Brendan just described, we want to have a $15 minimum wage at Target. Now that needs to be supported. You can say, let's hope that the consumer in a moral sense says, let's reward Target in the marketplace and let's go and shop there, even if it's more expensive than Walmart, because they're doing better by their employees. There's no evidence that the market rewards you that way. In fact, Target would probably go out of business if they were paying that much more than Walmart, because there wouldn't be enough consumer support for their higher prices to help that wage part, and they alone would not move the economy to spend that money into it and create that growth that we were talking about earlier. So you look at it, and that is where the carrot and stick of the government can do the most good, when you say, listen, yes, we understand any of you acting as an individual actor will actually get hurt if you do this.
Right.
That's why it's important for us to say, okay, we're all going to do this.
Yeah, that's why federal laws exist.
Right. Especially the tax code. The beautiful part about tax and regulation, when it's used correctly, is you incentivize good behavior in the market, you punish bad behavior, and then you say, hey, it's still a free market, but we're going to make you pay the ultimate cost. Because let's talk about that too, that there's been so many stories done on the percentage of Walmart employees. If you ever saw I would highly recommend the documentary, The High Cost of Low Prices, where it talks about all of the subsidy, meaning if a third of your workers are qualifying for food stamps and other federal benefits, Medicaid, then you're now the 5 of the 10 richest people in the country have come from that empire, scions of Sam Walton,
and paying poverty wages.
Yes, not only poverty wage, it's subsidized
poverty
wages.
wages.
Socialized Walmart. Why don't we ever hear about
Why
socialized
are we propping
medicine?
up Walmart of all places?
And they actually have food stamp little kiosks where workers can sign up for food stamps in
they
Walmart.
direct them toward it.
Yeah, they have little signs outside when you walk in saying, if you work here and you need help with your food, we can get you through this process. So they actually go through the charity of helping these people sign up for food stamps.
It's not even hidden. They're like, we know you'll need food stamps if you work here.
Yeah.
So we made it easy. We have a food stamp kiosk. You could get your paycheck and your food stamps all in one place.
And they frame it like they're heroes, like we're going to really help you guys out here. But yeah, it's one of the mechanisms through which a huge corporation like Walmart is subsidized, and a family like the Waltons
Let's say
makes about
socialized, because that's the word that we right.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's it's publicly subsidized private profit.
Otherwise known as socialism in conservative circles, as long as we're talking about the poor people that get it, not the companies who exploit it, right?
Exactly.
All right, let's go into a couple of news articles here. We've got, I think this is why Elsie didn't show up today, because she had so many nice things to say about Janet Yellen last week. And I did as well. And, Alex and I have talked about this before, and we were kind of like, listen, in terms of who you're going to get confirmed, in terms of who they're going to nominate, you can do a lot worse than Janet Yellen. And, so we were a little bit like optimistic about that idea. And, I still am in that sense.
And her extremely progressive husband, right?
Yes.
We still counting on that guy to...
Yes, I brought that up last week. In fact, it was Alex who gave me the paper written by her husband.
Oh, cool.
But we did learn that in this whole GameStop fiasco, that Yellen received $810,000 in speaking fees from Citadel, the hedge fund that allegedly bailed out Melvin Capital in their short position on GameStop. Alex, can you fill us in a little bit more about Citadel and their relationship to Melvin?
Sure. Citadel is a pioneer in high frequency trading. They're a hedge fund, and what hedge funds do is they speculate on commodities, specifically stocks. Hedge funds take short positions in highly liquid assets, which stocks are one of the most liquid assets. And Citadel pioneered high frequency trading, which is to say buying a stock and holding onto it for nanoseconds and selling it once the price increases a few cents and making a profit off of that transaction, which is adding nothing to the economy.
And we found out that one of the ways they do that is by paying money to apps like Robinhood to say, hey, give us all your data about where money's moving so that we can make these lightning fast algorithm trades more effectively. Correct?
Yes, they call that front running, and that's technically illegal, although it's not enforced. And Melvin,
not when the big guys do it, at least.
Not when the big guys do it, exactly. Melvin Capital was spun out of Citadel by a gentleman who was a high-up executive at Citadel. He was fired or had to be let go of from Citadel because he engaged in insider trading, which, of course, everybody does all the time on Wall Street and the street in London.
It's like a speeding
but he got
ticket,
caught.
right?
Yeah. So
some people get pulled over, but everybody's doing it.
Everybody's doing it. And he started Melvin Capital with $1 billion from the CEO of Melvin Capital.
That was his punishment,
Ken Griffin.
Right?
That was his punishment. And in 2 years, Melvin became one of the premier hedge funds in terms of their returns. In their second year, they posted 83% returns, which is pretty unheard of for a hedge fund that young. They were started in 2014. And since then, they have been known as a premier hedge fund on Wall Street. And they were the fund who took the short position. In fact, it wasn't really a short position. It's what's referred to as a naked short position in GameStop, which
meaning
is
purely speculative. So
purely
no
speculative,
right.
and they were selling more. They were borrowing more stocks than were actually available in the market, which means they were counterfeiting stocks, which is illegal, of course, as well. But they were spun out from Citadel, and Citadel is the largest client of Robinhood. And, I was trying to tell people with these commission-free trading apps that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. In the same way that Facebook, you're not paying for Facebook. Facebook sells your information to advertisers. These free commission trading apps like Robinhood, Webull, and many others, they are selling the execution orders of retail investors to the big dogs who can then front run it and make literally millions of dollars in a couple hours front running trades.
Assisted by the entire so-called financial media, which when you peel that onion back, all you find out is they're a giant commercial for these firms that buy the ads on it. Yeah. And you wonder, you're like, well, why is this CEO on here talking about this stock? And it's like, oh, maybe he's trying to raise the profile of their company so more people invest. No.
It's the opposite. Very often it's the opposite too. They're trying to lower it just a bit, a bit.
Like we saw with Bill Ackman last year, who went on CNBC and freaked out in February about the prospect of the airline industry going down, the cruise industry going down. And I think he actually
Hilton
cried.
Will go to zero.
Hilton will go to zero. And then what does he do? He swoops in. He's another big hedge fund manager. He goes in, swoops in, and buys all of these stocks at depressed prices, knowing full well that the government was going to step in and ensure that no stockholders, no asset holders would take a haircut.
I was talking about this with my brother last night, who has only been sort of casually interested in it, and we were talking about why this hurt the hedge funds, and he was just trying to make sense of it. And he asked me, so is any of this activity that the Redditors are doing or that's happening in the stock market going to actually hurt these hedge funds? And are we going to see these hedge fund managers out on the street ever? And I said, absolutely not.
No. They're too powerful and crafty.
Yeah, they all know each other and they all help each other too.
Yeah,
so
they collude big time.
Yeah, and I said, no, I don't think so.
Oh, and there comes another problem with that whole class of very relatively small number of people having more wealth than they know what to do with. One of the other things they do with it, which has a sweeter ROI than even any of the stuff we're talking about, is they pump a ton of it into politics to make sure that they always get their way. So they have this outsized influence, and that's another argument for having better tax policy and better, just overall fiscal policy to create less of these small people, enormous pockets of wealth, because they get outsized political power that you and I will never have. And that's how we make sure, hey, did anybody go to jail yet from Wall Street in the 2009 collapse?
No. Yeah, not in this country. China executed a few bankers.
They cut heads off. Yeah.
They literally cut heads off. China actually, maybe a week ago or so, they executed a guy who over the last 10 years had taken $280 million in bribes, who was a big financial guy, I think at the People's Bank of China. But yeah, they don't mess around. Whereas over here, the financial corporations and the specific managers who created this crisis in the 2000s, they always fail up.
Yes,
they fail up. Jamie Dimon was the CEO of JP Morgan during the crash in 2008. His salary package just came out the other day, $31.5 million.
Well, he earned it.
Yeah, he has a firm handshake. And he wears a suit really well, so he earned it for sure.
Well,
This is actually a side note that I don't think many people are talking about because of the, whole insurrection thing. But one major side effect of removing Trump's Twitter account is that he's not tanking and rocketing stocks anymore with targeted tweets about businesses, about American corporations. Nobody was manipulating prices more than he was during his presidency, because he could say, hey, this company sucks and let's all boycott them. And
that had real effects.
Yeah. And what do you
Real
think
effects.
happened? Those prices would tank the next day. And we don't have that anymore.
That was one of the reasons why Wall Street was so eager to back the Biden administration. Was one, he told them nothing will fundamentally change. And then they said, we'll trade, even if it means a little bit more in taxes, we'll trade that for the stability in the markets.
Yeah. But I don't think Biden will tweet in the middle of the night that Goodyear should get a boycott. That's probably not going to happen.
No, I don't think he tweets at all.
Yeah.
The other thing that we have is Amazon forced to pay $61.7 million by the FTC for keeping tips of Amazon drivers. Alex, you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
Well, to be honest, I'm not super familiar with it, but I did read that number that you quoted, the 61.7 million, that they were I guess taking it. I assume through it was electronic tips. It couldn't have been
I don't
through
know.
cash
They
tips.
can't, right? But I've never seen an option to tip.
Me
an
either.
Amazon
I read
delivery
all
driver.
about
Yeah.
this and said, "Oh, geez, like obviously
I feel bad
give them
now.
their tips." And then I thought, wait a minute, I've never tipped an Amazon driver. I very often don't even see an Amazon driver,
Right.
so it must be part of your ordering process. It must be there must be something.
So we'll
in there
look
that you
further to this in, but the fuckery on this was that they kept $61.7 million because Amazon apparently didn't make enough money off of the quarantine and the increased door sales that they needed to look some way to offset their shipping costs.
Yeah, those poor guys. But I do
Diversify their
know.
income.
I know the new head of the SEC. There was a great article in the Financial Times about him the other day. I wish I could remember his name. He's a former Goldman banker, but he was in the Obama administration on the finance side during the 2008 crash, and I guess he was pretty hard. I guess as hard as you can be in a free market society like ours on the financiers. And he's somebody who Elizabeth Warren had tapped for her administration when she was running to be, I think, in Treasury. But he's somebody who, from what I've been reading about, has been taking a harder line on Wall Street and the bigger corporations, the big conglomerates. So I'm hoping that this portends well for the future in terms of the SEC taking some steps to step in, at least on the side of the consumers, because they're sure as heck not going to get in there and break up the speculations that are happening in the hedge funds. But maybe if they can get in there and claw back, this $61.7 million in tips, that to me portends well, or at least better than not having enforcement action like that on the government side. So
and maybe we
I
can
hope
get
that's
the
good.
CFPB rolling again, because that sort of turned into an arm of the government in the Trump administration, where that was doing good work protecting consumers. And then it got taken over by a crony and sort of went away as a functional.
Well, and I'll say that the first kneecapping of it was in the very beginning when President Obama wouldn't go to bat to get Elizabeth Warren on it.
Right.
And she wanted very much before she ran for Senate to be the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that she really was the person who drove the creation of it. And that's somebody who has consistently gone to bat against these big Wall Street banks for the consumers and for the little retail trade, for everybody. And they don't want her anywhere around Wall Street.
But curiously, she did come out against the speculation that's happening with the GameStop stock. She tweeted out the other day that she thought that the SEC should look into that, and that it's causing speculative frenzies and inducing market destabilization, which I thought was curious coming from somebody like her, given that she knows what drives these sort of frenzies is insider trading, high frequency trading, front running trades, and that kind of a thing. So I was puzzled by that statement, although it's not technically wrong. And what they are doing on Reddit, it probably is some sort of collusion.
Yeah.
But I did.
It's just a different way to get to the same.
It's different collusion.
end.
Yeah, it's poor people collusion. Yeah.
Right. We don't have the big ivory towers. We've got these pages and our cell phones.
We have
So
subreddits.
Yeah.
We're kind of trying to do the same thing you guys are, but that shit's not for you, Jack.
Yeah, no, not your casino, buddy. Get out of here.
And that's part of the thing that keeps the class division. And let's go back one more thing I want to add to that $15 that keeps coming in my head with these things we're saying. One of them is if you're a conservative, how good was the Trump economy if it can't support a living wage? So if it's the greatest economy in the history of the country, then if we just paid people enough to buy food in an apartment and that would cause it to crash, then that's not a very strong argument for how good your economy was, one. But then two, it's this masterful way that they manipulate the working class to turn on each other. A popular tweet that became a big meme was a guy saying, hey, I work at an Amazon warehouse for $16 an hour. No way somebody that's flipping burgers should be making $1 less than I am. And it's like, really, the $16 an hour guy is the one shitting on
he's
a
already
$50
looking
minimum
down.
wage.
Yeah.
And
Our classism has gotten so bad that the people who have just a little bit more than $15 an hour are like, listen, you can't knock on the door of my ivory tower before you ask me such a horrible thing about the people below me.
But the other part is, what do you think the path is to 25 for you? So we're paying 16 now when it's 725 because that's what it costs in the market to get above minimum wage skills. So you're looking, you're saying, all right, there's a class of employee that's flipping burgers. I want a little bit higher than that in my warehouse. Not necessarily because it's harder work. You know why you're getting more in the warehouse, Jack? It's because it is monotonous to the point that people want to shove a fork in their eye at the end of every shift for working there. So they're like, you know what?
Pay them more.
Yes. Listen, if you gave me, I've done warehouse work in college and in high school, and I flipped burgers in high school as well at McDonald's. And I'll tell you what, for the same wages, I'm flipping burgers all day long. It goes by way faster.
Yeah.
It is a lot more like just of a chummy environment, and it's not as bad. So you have to say to somebody, I don't want to, Jeff Bezos doesn't want to give up this money, but I got to give you a little bit more to work in my warehouse.
Because this is what they miss, right? If you're making 16 at a warehouse and suddenly the federal minimum wage is 15,
what does it cost to attract you now?
So now, I don't have to work in a warehouse anymore. I can do anything. I can work at a coffee shop for 50
So what does a warehouse have to do?
Raise the wage.
Maybe you're getting 23 now because it's 15, right?
Yes.
And then if you're getting 23, what happens to the guy getting 23 at something that actually does take a higher skill than you? Air condition repair with a certificate from a trade school. Maybe he's making 23. Oh, shit, I could just work in an Amazon warehouse and not have to worry about climbing up in a ductwork and stuff like that. Oh, shit, we might have to pay you 31, right? That's how it happens. And then the whole economy grows and you have a big burgeoning middle class. This kind of thing happened after World War II. Yes. And if I read my history right, we experienced the greatest growth in the history of our country and arguably the greatest growth of middle class in the history of the world.
And that's happening, that exact same thing is happening right now in post-COVID China. Where they're experiencing a massive middle class growth, and they're having a larger explosion in wages. They have people who can afford the middle class amenities that used to be available to, well, let's be honest, mostly white people in this country in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So that same mechanism is happening over in China, where after World War II, the United States was kind of the last manufacturing base because Europe was bombed to shit. They were destroyed. And in the post-COVID world, China has been left as the kind of biggest manufacturing base in the world, whereas Europe is shut down, we've shut down, but China has managed to get a kind of hold over this thing and open back up, and they're experiencing the middle-class boom that we experienced in this country post-World War II in the late 40s and 50s.
Yeah, we talked about that yesterday, that they're developing their own consumer class, which was always the thing they're missing. So China had this poor peasantry that provided to cheap labor, but they didn't have a market in their country for those goods. So they had to get them all out to everywhere else in the world, and they had to work very hard on opening up those markets, where now they're discovering, it's actually nice when you have a functional market economy like we did. Alex and I talked about that yesterday, where we used to have, post-World War II, companies like Zenith and General Electric and General Motors, where everything was made in the United States, and the person at the factory could buy the television, buy the car. Yeah. We had a functional market economy, which we no longer have. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, China has a strong middle class that's burgeoning, but how many millionaires do we have?
That's a great point.
So we lead the world in millionaires.
Billionaires as well.
And probably billionaires.
Billionaires, definitely, yeah.
There's probably a few sneaky trillionaires in there, too. We just don't know about them. A few sneak trillionaires.
Yeah, Forbes doesn't know everything. And guess what it's time for? Brendan's bad take of the week.
So this has been a riveting conversation about finance. Let's shift the gears to impeachment. The other big giant story. The trial's going to start next week. And of course, who has something to say about it? but our friend, the senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. So the bad take of the week comes from Lindsey Graham.
Lady G?
Yeah, Lady G. Exactly.
Definitely not a closeted
AKA.
homosexual. Not at all.
So Lindsey gets on Fox News. I have a feeling a lot of these bad takes are going to come from Fox News. I don't mean for them to, but hey, that's where they say crazy most often right now. He makes a comment on the impending impeachment trial. By the way, I just want to point out that Lindsey Graham, because the Senate hasn't passed their rules and the transition over to the Democrats leading all of the committees just yet, even though it sounds like they've agreed on what they're going to do, Lindsey Graham is still leading the judiciary right now, which means Merrick Garland is not getting a confirmation vote. So they are basically filibustering Merrick Garland for the second time. Yeah. So anyway, Lindsey Graham hops on Fox News and he says the following. If they, meaning Democrats, want to call witnesses now that they didn't call in the impeachment process in the House, this thing could go on for weeks or months, and that would be very bad for the country. So, to my Democratic colleagues, if you vote to call one witness, get ready for a long trial. If you open up that can of worms, we will want the FBI to come in and tell us about how people actually pre-planned those attacks and what happened with the security footprint at the Capitol. There are three things that are so outrageous about this. First of all, yes, we do want to hear from the FBI about this attack being pre-planned. Yes, we do. Like, if he thinks that that's some sort of threat that the oh gosh, please don't tell us about the people who pre-planned the insurrection. Yes, we do want to hear that, Lindsey Graham. Second of all, in this same exact quote that he says, this trial going long would be bad for the country, he says, we will make it bad for the country. You will force our hand. If you call one witness, then we will call all these other witnesses, and we will do what I have just told you is really bad for the country. If you really believe that, then don't call any witnesses.
Right.
I think the third part of this is really sad is that he really doesn't want witnesses to be called. I think he truly just wants this to be over with because he believes in his heart no amount of witnesses or evidence that will come through in the impeachment trial will change the results. I think he and most of the Republicans know that 17 of them are not going to move over with the Democrats to convict. So what's the point? Well, the point is there have to be consequences, and we need to hear and see about all of these things. We want to hear from the FBI. We want to see what happened, where the organization was, and we need to point out who needs to be going to jail, and it needs to get national attention. So that's what's important from the Democrats' point of view. And of course, Lindsey Graham doesn't want that for his best pal, Donald Trump. So Lindsey Graham, welcome. Your first time to the bad take of the week.
All right. That leads us perfect segue into our final subject, which is where the GOP now is. And this is, I don't ever want to say we're at peak lunacy because I can't imagine how hard I'd have to knock on wood after I said that. But we're now at a point where Marjorie Taylor Greene is, and again, this is one of the QAnon Congress people. She's from the great state of Georgia. And, it just keeps getting worse. Last week we talked about liking the let's kill Nancy Pelosi. We talked about a number of other issues. I don't think we got the Jewish space lasers. I think that came out Friday.
That was right after.
What?
Yeah, she seems to be alone on this. So Marjorie Taylor Greene has some social media posts where she talks about that the wildfires in California are actually caused by Jewish space lasers to clear land for a high-speed rail or something like that.
I'd never thought about that before. That's an interesting
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, when you think about it.
So, this woman has been failed upward onto the education committee in Congress because, that's what we need. Mm-hmm. Now they're having a really conundrum here in the Republican Party. And what do we do with Marjorie Taylor Greene? Because one, she's batshit crazy. And then two, about half of our party is in love with her. And she's very, plausibly a, maybe Republican candidate for the primary in 2024. That's where we're at right now. So she met with Kevin McCarthy, I believe, yesterday. She is now supposedly in contact with President Trump, is going to meet with him. McCarthy made his pilgrimage last Friday to Mar-a-Lago. So Trump has very successfully bounced back from this insurrection, where his approval rating among Republicans has now recovered to where it was pre-insurrection. So he's paid no price for it. He's clearly not going to be convicted in the Senate. I don't know if anything that comes out is going to do anything but further outrage Democrats. But what we're learning here is that the Republican Party is with Trump, is staying with Trump. And the idea that you can thread the needle Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz style, Ted Cruz got attacked by the MAGA crowd this week just for saying, hey, the rhetoric was over the top. Trump shouldn't have said that.
Look at how quickly they'll turn on you. Ted Cruz was like, remember, there were people going through papers in the Senate chambers during the insurrection, and they got caught on video saying, no, it's cool. Ted Cruz would want us to do this, man.
Well, he authored the attempt to stop the certification.
Right. He was the Senate approval of the objection to the votes. Yeah.
So you look at that and you say, all right, that's how far he was willing to go for Donald Trump, but he wasn't willing to go quite far enough. Of course, Trump's legal team for the Senate all dissolved itself immediately because they said, yeah, we're not going to argue the batshit crazy, conspiracy theories about Brazil and all the other places that were involved in stolen election. We're going to talk about a procedural thing. We'll argue that you can't impeach someone after they're out of office. That's about the only thing we see here. Nope, we have to do the stop the steal argument. Fire, everybody leave. That's what we're doing. If you're not on board with that, Trump is going to oust you, and he's going to have the support of his half of the party, maybe greater half of the party. What am I seeing it correctly? What I see is Republicans have a very clear choice here, which is either they go Liz Cheney and break completely off and suffer the wrath of Trump and his supporters, or they go all 100% in and, Marjorie Taylor Greene becomes the face of the party.
Well, they haven't figured out which one they're going to do yet. And I think that's evidence that Trump has just poisoned this party beyond belief, because they cannot live without him. And his supporters, and when I say supporters in this case, I mean the politicians who support the Trumpism, like they can't live without them either. They haven't been able to figure out a way to rid themselves of Trump and move on. But you've got this major fracture happening. So last week we said, hey, the Republicans have a chance to put down this crazy lady in the House. And what do you know? Mitch McConnell comes out and says that this is a cancer in our party. It's loony. And then Mitt Romney says, we have a big tent. We do not have a big enough tent for Republicans and lunatics, essentially, kooks. So you actually have prominent Republicans trying to move on from Trumpism, trying to say, hey, guys, this is not good for us. We should return to things that win elections. Meanwhile, you have the minority leader in the House meeting privately and so far not stripping Marjorie Taylor Greene of any of her committee assignments. I think she actually got 2. It was,
yes.
Is it budget and education? It was one other besides education, but she's still on them as of now. And meanwhile, they're asking, McCarthy about Liz Cheney, and they're like, well, we're going to have to take a strong look at that. That's the one that they're concerned about. So Republicans have no idea what they're doing right now.
Our own Matt Gaetz was out in North Dakota, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And he had a massive crowd behind him.
Yeah.
With the standing up against Liz Cheney. And him saying, I basically stand with Trump, and she stands against him. And even in her own state where her father was, political, royalty, and she walked right into that Senate seat despite no real,
House seat,
despite and to the number 3 in the party, or number 3 in the House, walked into that with very little credentials other than being Cheney's daughter, and to see that even Wyoming is falling apart on traditional neoconservatism and moving full Trump.
Wow. I think Trump has poisoned the Republican Party rhetorically. I think the way he spoke, the sort of non-filtered way in which he would do things like taking down Jeb Bush and sort of the whole Bush dynasty during the debates in 2015, that, in my view, opened up sort of a Pandora's box of refreshing, even if it's at this sort of libidinal primal level, this sort of refreshing take from a politician to say sort of, F the system and this, both sides are corrupt and Goldman Sachs terrible and this and that. But what's happened is you've got people like Representative Greene who are sort of taking this to maybe not its natural conclusion. I hate to speculate on that, what that will be, but amping up the level of rhetoric from going from sort of, as much as Trump is discussing, as much as Trump was terrible, but saying things like, "Oh, Jeb Bush, you're awful," or "Yeah, we're keeping some troops in Syria to guard the oil fields," things like that, to going from that kind of a little wink and a nod thing to let's kill the opposite party leaders. I don't believe in the Parkland school shooting. That was a psyop, and just ramping up the rhetoric in the way that you can see that happens in culture, where it's like music, they push the boundaries on what they can say, or movies, they push the bounds on what kind of violence is allowed to be seen on the screen. It's this ramping up of the rhetoric, and I think she is representative of a sort of natural part of this sort of Pandora's box that Trump has opened up with the rhetoric.
Trump went off trail so that Marjorie Taylor Greene could go straight off into the forest. You know what I mean? Like, he blazed a new trail in politics that has opened this door for lunatics to thrive.
Yeah, and I've beaten up the Democrats on neoliberalism and its contribution to Trumpism, because the reality is that it was still a response to 8 years of neoliberalism, that you had this opportunity to say, you know what, fuck the system, I just want somebody to burn it down. But at the same time, there's no sympathy and no shortage of blame for the Republican Party, because this is the end result of all those dog whistles, of all that wink nodding to the crazies and saying, well, we're not going to totally discount them, because in the end, they're a minority party. When you look at registration, they're nationally, they're just a little over half of what Democrats have. Every election cycle, they get more than 1 million less total aggregate votes than Democrats do. But because of the gerrymandering they've been able to do, they're able to still have a majority presence in Washington. So they really need this patch quilt cobbled together, the religious zealots, the evangelicals, the right-wing, lunatics, the extremists, the white nationalists, they need the separatists, they need, all of those people under that tent in order to get to the point where they can have that 50-50 tie in the Senate.
And the problem, of course, is that with this patchwork coalition, they did pretty well in the 2020 elections. I mean, yes, Joe Biden won by 7 million votes, but the Electoral College favors Republicans so much right now that if 45,000 votes in a select few states had switched the other way, we would have a second term of Donald Trump.
And
right
they
now.
picked up
House seats.
And the Senate didn't go nearly as easily as it looked.
Right. So if it hadn't been for Trump and his craziness post-election, they likely would have won in Georgia and kept the Senate.
And if it hadn't been for us promising $2,000 checks that we're still not giving.
Yeah, exactly. And if Trump had done anything about COVID, if he had done anything to stave that off a little bit, I think he would have fared a lot better in the election. But they didn't do anything.
And so for Republicans, you look at this election, you say, hey, we got pretty close. Even with Trump at full craziness, completely ignoring COVID and like weekly scandals and crises, we very nearly had a great election. And now they have to figure out a way to stitch all these patches back together, because now it's fracturing. You see, even Mitch McConnell, I think, said, hey, Liz Cheney is a valuable member of our party. That's the strongest, that is the top Republican right now.
Well, I think what you have with Mitch McConnell is the same thing you have with Chuck Schumer, is you have them acting in genuine fear. If you take, they're both very egotistical men. Chuck Schumer has wanted to be Senate Majority Leader his entire career. And
now Mitch McConnell won't let him, by the way. Now that he finally is.
And but still, you see he's sort of moving towards the AOC wing because, one, there's the possibility AOC comes at him in a Senate primary. I don't think she'd be able to beat him because of the support from upstate. But at the same time, that's something he doesn't relish, having to be in that battle. But then also, he wants to keep control of the Senate. He doesn't want to be Senate Majority Leader for 2 years.
Right.
And Mitch McConnell desperately wants that back. And I think Mitch McConnell is maybe anticipating the wrong way. I think he's thinking back to like Tea Party era and saying, hey, remember when in 2010 we primaried a bunch of people, but they were so batshit crazy they couldn't get through a general, so we actually lost Senate seats that we should have won, and that did happen. But I don't know that he's making the right argument, because I don't think we're where we're at in 2010. I think some of those states you can win with the batshit crazy.
In fact, like the most common way to get into Congress over the last few elections has been primarying from the extreme.
Yeah.
From the left and from the right.
Right.
There are very, very few seats that are changing hands anymore. I think, it was like less than 20 changed parties in this very hotly contested election in 2020. But people are losing primaries and then coasting into Congress because they're from such intensely either Republican or Democratic districts. So yeah, primaries are, I think, the way to go now if you want to influence your party. It's not about bringing a moderate in and hoping you can pick off a middle seat. That's actually much harder.
Yes. And that's what the parties want, and they keep trying to like push that moderation when it's like you're not listening to the voters if that's what you're hearing.
Yeah, and I think the point you brought up earlier about how Trumpism is a response to neoliberalism. I think the neoliberalism over the last 40 years is going to create generations like mine, the millennials and the Gen Zs and people after that. They're going to be less responsive to the centrist manager neoliberal globalization voices on both sides of the aisle. I think they're going to be less responsive to that when they see the devastation in their communities, their parents losing jobs, people losing houses, and the eviction crisis that's about to happen. I think it's going to be harder to sell neoliberalism, whether it's on one side or the other. And I think the moderates are great representatives of that sort of standard neoliberal voice. I think people are going to be more attracted to hey, we got to kill Nancy Pelosi, or we need to have socialized medicine. Not that those two are equivalent things on either side.
It's so sad that those are the extremists.
Yeah, can we have something just like, nice and normal that most other countries have, or could we just kill everybody?
Should we be allowed to murder our leaders?
Where the middle really is comprised increasingly of wealthy suburbanites.
Of the corporatists.
Yes, who are saying, I just really like the way my stock portfolio has been looking lately. I love my tax bill.
So let's rock the boat too much.
Course.
Yeah, can we just do some stuff like identity politics? Can we be nicer to gay people and trans?
Yes.
And let's focus on that. And let's focus on issues that cost nothing to my lifestyle.
Yes. Yeah. Can we substitute class consciousness and class politics for culture?
Yes.
And cultural issues. And, it's funny. I was up in Lexington, Massachusetts, house sitting for a cousin of mine. It's a very wealthy area. And I have not seen more Black Lives Matter signs up anywhere than on these 5-story mansions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a way to take culture as a substitute for class politics.
Yes,
and these things are important too, by the way.
It's by no means
very, very important.
Absolutely, by no means saying that we shouldn't be making strides toward being a more inclusive society. I don't even like using the word inclusive, just an equal rights society from all aspects. But it's very suspicious when you have people saying, yeah, but let's just focus on that. Let's focus on the thing that costs me nothing.
Especially when it is a moderate who's wearing a woke suit, right?
Yes.
Someone who's saying, I care about all of these things.
Except economic justice.
We don't need to talk about economic justice or the minimum wage or any of that stuff. But I'm going to drape myself with all of these cultural issues so that the progressives feel like they can vote for me just enough to get me over the hump and win a moderate election.
And that was something that drove, as you just suggested, that move away from neoliberalism. And that's where it was either picked up by Sanders or Trump. And one of the big places where it was picked up by Trump was in the former industrial areas of the United States, which have been completely hollowed out. And you now have kids and grandkids of factory workers who made a very good living being warehouse workers, barely getting by. And they're looking and they're saying, God, where was that American dream that I had? And I said this in 2016, and I took some heat from it from progressives. But the dumbest thing that the DNC did was they tried to take a page of the playbook from Republicans, where Republicans were very good at saying, you know what? How do we drive turnout with nothing to do with our candidates? While at the state level, let's try to have a bunch of referendums on gun rights and abortion that drive out people who will then vote for whoever has an R next to them, because they'll say, I support this referendum, right? So that's a good little trick. So in 2016, Democrats said, what do we have on that so we don't have to talk about? Because none of the candidates, except Sanders, wanted the minimum wage. None of them wanted Medicare for all. What can we talk about? Let's talk about bathroom bills. Let's put that on every. So now you had these hollowed out working class areas in the so-called blue wall, where Trump cobbled together his victory, 77,000 votes through Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, of people that I just described saying, wait a minute, what? This election's about where we take a piss and what bathroom we use? Are you shitting me?
It's alienating.
Yes.
It's very alienating. And Chris Hedges made a good study of this in 2016, the sort of phenomenon of the the Rust Belt blue collar worker who voted for Sanders in the primary and then Trump in the general.
Yes, we've talked about that extensively on the podcast.
They were not going to vote for a Clinton because those people remember NAFTA and what it did to their communities, because they see it every day when they drive by the empty factory field that used to be there that's now in Monterey.
Right. And this is a full circle argument. Let's go all the way back to when we were talking about the reconciliation pass of the
tax cuts?
Not the tax cuts, the COVID bill.
Okay.
The relief bill. People don't care. We care. The three of us and our listeners are probably have an interest in politics to know, like, gosh, are Democrats going to pass this through reconciliation, or are they going to try to get support from 10 senators to end the filibuster so they can pass it? Nobody cares. They want relief. Because if you say, well, listen, we tried to be bipartisan and we tried to get it through, but we couldn't, all people are going to hear is, you couldn't.
Right.
And if you pass it with 51 votes and Kamala passing the tiebreaker, nobody cares if it means that their lives are going to get better. And that's what we need. That's what we need voters to understand, is that that's what we need Democrats to understand about voters, is that they want to see results. They don't want to hear about bipartisan efforts leading nowhere.
They want to hear the, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I think people want to hear the sort of increase in terms of rhetoric. They want to hear that Marjorie Taylor Greene rhetoric. Yeah. They want to hear
burn down the institution.
The AOC rhetoric on the other side. They don't want to hear, like you're saying, they don't want to hear this, like, well, we couldn't get anything done. They want to hear, let's fuck it up. Let's let's do some stuff. Yeah.
Well, tell me about the 10 Republicans you sat down and talked to. Tell me about what you passed now that you have a mandate and you have the presidency and the House and the Senate. What are you doing with it?
There was an article that I wrote on punkrockpolitics.com, where you could always go to get additional content, a couple weeks ago, when they were floating the idea of tying comprehensive immigration reform into the COVID bill and with the stimulus checks. And I was talking about how incredibly stupid that is to take. And again, how it really smacks of, we're not really trying to solve this. We're actually going to bog it down with something that we know isn't going to pass. Democrats and Republicans are not going to agree on comprehensive immigration reform. It's not going to happen. It's one of those issues that neither one of them really wants to fix. They like to fundraise off it. Republicans like to say, hey, Democrats just want open borders. Democrats want to say, hey, they're locking up kids at the border and send in money so we can take over the Senate. Yeah. And the thing that you have to look at there is, again, to Brendan's point, what do Americans want? And the polling consistently says, even Joe Manchin was called out on this by his Republican governor this week of, hey, listen, these things you're voting against are popular with Democrats in West Virginia. Don't give this whole, West Virginia Democrats are different. No, the West Virginia Democratic senator is different, but Medicare for All polls at 70 or 80%.
Huge.
The $15 wage polls at 70, 80%. They are hurting and they want help. I really think that if the Biden administration did nothing in 2021 except get the vaccine deployment correct and get stimulus passed as big as possible and get us through economically to where, as fast as possible, we're probably looking at best case scenario, because of how this rollout has gone so poorly with the vaccine so far. We're probably looking at best case scenario, if we don't have too many variant strains and different things that happen that we can't control, we're probably looking at September or October before we start having a real impact on the economic engines of the things being open and people being comfortable going out and spending money in all the different ways that you can spend money, not just on Amazon and Uber Eats. So if the Biden administration just focused on that and didn't get any of it bogged down by trying to tie it into things that aren't going to happen, and at the end of 2021, they had an excellent record on vaccine rollout to run on, and Americans got relief and they remember those checks coming and getting them through the hard times, I think his approval rating would probably be about 80%.
Yeah.
And I think then in
Then
2022,
yeah.
he could go to the bully pulpit and pass everything the regular way.
Right.
Because Republicans would be afraid of a president with an 80% approval rating, like when Reagan had one of 85,
Yeah.
in the early 80s.
Yeah, he's got a great opportunity to do that because there's so much pain out there economically and otherwise, and mental pain. I read a story recently about teenage suicide spiking in school districts where the schools are shut down, so they decided, okay, let's open them back up. I mean, there's so much pain that the amelioration of that, I think, would go such a long way in the minds of the voters.
Yes.
I really think that. Yeah, I think you're 100% right.
So 1.9 trillion on the table through reconciliation. We may have answers soon.
Hopefully, that's going to wrap it up for this week. I did that just for you, Brendan.
Hold on, let me get another bad take. No, all right.
I'm Mitch Maley for Brendan Ragan and Alex Boyce. Thanks for joining us today, Alex. This has been another episode of Punk Rock Politics.